I want to go ahead and pass the ball over to Irving Weisdorf, a co-chair for Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, to introduce the next speaker. Thank you so much, Professor.
So 100 years ago, when the League of Nations created the mandate system, and specifically the mandate for Palestine, there were two important ideas that had taken hold. The first was promoted by President Woodrow Wilson and was referred to as the self-determination of nations. This theory or belief held that the only way to avoid another devastating world war was for nations to have their own states and govern themselves. This idea led to the formation of several mandates as the colonies of the Ottoman Empire were freed from Ottoman rule. The goal of the mandate system was for Britain and France, the victorious allies, to help nations that had been ruled by Turkey to develop civil institutions by which they would eventually govern themselves. The second idea was strongly supported by Christian Zionists and referred to specifically the Ottoman colony called Palestine. Christian Zionists in Britain and the United States recognized that the Jewish people had been dispossessed of their homeland for 2,000 years, and that that homeland was Palestine, one of the Ottoman colonies just freed. Thus, the mandate recognized the indigeneity of the Jewish people in ancient Palestine. When the mandate for Palestine was born, it was set aside for the Jewish people, as Dr. Zion just said. It's important to note that Palestine, the colony of Palestine, not only comprised the land west of the Jordan River, including Judea and Samaria, but also the land on the east side of the Jordan River, which in 1922 was hived off and illegally, one might say, given by Britain to the Hashemite Arabs and became the Kingdom of Jordan. Jordan now occupies 77% of what was Palestine. That was the first two-state solution. Here to tell you more about the mandate for Palestine and just how important it can be in the narrative against BDS and the occupation lies that are being spread today by leftists in concert with the Islamist world community is Eizabeth Berney of the Zionist Organization of America. Liz Berney is an attorney and the National Director of Research and Special Projects for the Zionist Organization of America, ZOA, the oldest pro-Israel organization in the United States. Liz assists ZOA's defense of Israel and the Jewish people, including by writing US Supreme Court amicus briefs, co-authoring op-eds, and representing ZOA in media appearances, synagogue speeches, panels, and debates. Liz also represents ZOA at the World Zionist Congress, the Zionist General Council, Karen Kayemet Israel, the European Conference on Countering Anti-Semitism, the American Zionist Movement, the American Zionist Policy Committee, and Area Elections Committee. She is also on the board of Ariel University in Samaria. Liz is a graduate of Cornell University and the University of Chicago Law School. Liz, you've been involved in a lot of advocacy on behalf of the Jewish people. Please talk to us about how knowing the underlying history and the facts around the creation of the mandate for Palestine can help us in our Israel advocacy. Liz, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to use so that we can go through this very quickly and efficiently in a limited amount of time. Thank you very much, Irving and Goldie and Eitan, for arranging this very important webinar. The mandate is not just a document from 1922 and the documents that surround it. These are documents that still have force today due to Article 80 of the UN Charter, which continued the rights given to in the mandate to the Jewish people. And so, there's a lot in these documents that can be used to advocate for the Jewish state. I'd like to I'll put up my, put this up right now. Okay, and these are the mandate is part of the bundle of documents and probably the key document for Israel advocate, many forms of Israel advocacy today. And all of you here are, I'm sure, are Israel advocates, so it's important to learn these. I'm sure many of you know them already, and I'd like to point out some of the, at the risk of, I'm trying to avoid duplicating what Professor Sion did, so I'm going to focus on those aspects of the mandate and surrounding documents that are key for advocating today. Okay, and this bundle of international rights include the Balfour Declaration and pre-approvals, the League of Nations Covenant, San Remo Resolution, the British Mandate for Palestine, 1922. Okay, I think what we should really, a lot of these bundle of rights are based on the foresight of the Jews from all over the world who came together at the first Zionist Congress. They've really given us a gift. And they produced something at the Zionist Congress called the Basel Program. And this Basel Program was that Zionism aims to establish a home for the Jewish people in Eretz Israel, secured under public law. And they made great efforts to do that, running around Europe, doing everything possible to obtain the legal rights. ZOA was actually there at the first Zionist Congress and at the Paris Peace Conference, and at some of these conferences. Theodor Herzl died at an early age, a few years after the Zionist Congress, because of his running around trying to meet with the German Kaiser, and it went during a trip to Israel, trying to meet with the Sultan and so on, the Turkish Sultan. This was a great effort, and we should use this as a gift today for what they ended up bringing us. The Balfour Declaration in 2017, some of the very important parts of it. A lot of people say, well, this is just a statement of intention that His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. But there was also a statement that they would use their best efforts. And for those who know contract law, best efforts actually has contractual force. That's nothing may prejudice another important aspect of this is that nothing may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jews. It doesn't say political rights. It doesn't give any political rights to the Arabs. Okay, and just recently we had, I'm used to. Okay, and subsequent documents also regarding the argument that this is just a statement of intention, subsequent documents, specifically the mandate, made effectuating the Balfour Declaration binding international law. The Senate concurrent resolution just recently, a few years ago, sponsored by the Republican senator from Oklahoma and the Democratic senator from Virginia, states that, whereas this letter known as the Balfour Declaration was effectuated into international law by the League of Nations on July 24th, 1922. Also note that the Balfour Declaration had pre-approvals from President Wilson in the United States and from France that also gave the Balfour Declaration an international imprimatur. And there's this best efforts commitment, and also Jewish assistance to the war effort was performance in return for the Balfour Declaration. But we don't even need that because the mandate effectuated the promises in the Balfour Declaration. The League of Nations Covenant, Article 22, is a binding international treaty which reaffirmed that the Ottoman Empire's sovereignty over the territory of that includes Palestine had ceased. And it made the well-being and development of each mandate's beneficiary, and that includes Israel was the beneficiary of the Palestine mandate, the mandate for Palestine, until the beneficiary could stand alone as an independent nation, a sacred trust of civilization. And that's very important, that this was a trust, a sacred trust, and made Britain the trustee of the mandate for the benefit of the Jewish people. The Arabs were the beneficiaries of mandates in the areas that became Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. The San Remo resolution was a binding international agreement also, and it legally obligated Britain to put into effect the Balfour Declaration for establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The British mandate for Palestine made the mandatory trustee, again, responsible to secure the establishment of the Jewish national home. foreseeing that no Palestine territory, and this is very important, that no Palestine territory shall be ceded or leased to or in any way placed under the control of the government of any foreign power. So the mandate made it a trust that this area a trust for the Jewish people, and to make sure that this area is not put under the government of any foreign power, which is very useful when people say that you're required to have a Palestinian state. And then also another obligation of Britain was to facilitate Jewish immigration and close settlement by Jews on the land. This is an important advocacy statement, which can be used to counter the idea that settlement by Jews in Judea and Samaria is illegal. It's right in the British Mandate for Palestine that there's an obligation, a trust of civilization, to facilitate Jewish immigration and close settlement by Jews on the land. The mandate also included a provision requiring Britain to facilitate enacting a nationality law, including provisions framed so as to facilitate the acquisition of Palestinian citizenship by Jews, and it just says Jews, who take up their permanent residence in Palestine. The British Mandate for Palestine also stated that recognition has been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home. And of course, there were Jews living in Palestine, in the area that became Israel, throughout all the years since the dispersions, since the Roman conquest. The United States was actually not part of the League of Nations, so it was not a signatory to the mandate. However, it became legally obligated in another matter. Well, first of all, there was something called the Lodge Fish Resolution in 1922, signed by President Harding, approving the establishment of the Jewish homeland in Palestine. And then in 1924, we had the Anglo-American Convention. That's a treaty, and under the US Constitution, treaties are the supreme law of the land. And it was signed by President Calvin Coolidge. It was ratified by the US Senate, so it's a binding US treaty, and it recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and designated the area as a sacred trust for reconstituting the Jewish homeland. Basically, attract the same language as the Balfour Declaration and the mandate. So that made it a US treaty obligation. That's something that we often point out when advocating against those who say that Israel, that Judea and Samaria or Jerusalem are illegally occupied. Okay, and then importantly, in 1945, the United Nations and the United States was a party to that. So the United States, and this is also has the status of an international treaty. The United States adopted UN Charter Article 80, which preserved intact all rights granted to the Jewish people under the British Mandate for Palestine, even after the mandate would expire in 1948. That's very important because sometimes you'll be debating with somebody and they say, oh, the debate, this happened 100 years ago. It's, the mandate expired. Well, those rights were preserved. And that means that the present day Israel, including Judea and Samaria, continues to be a sacred trust for close Jewish settlement and reconstituting the Jewish homeland. Legal scholar Howard Brief explained that Article 80 prevents the UN from transferring rights over any part of Israel to any non-Jewish entity, such as a Palestinian Authority or a Palestinian state. Remember, part of the mandate and part of the rights granted to the Jewish people were this right to not have any foreign government take part of this land. In November of 1947, the Arabs rejected, of course, the so-called partition resolution. I'll get to that in another slide. But I do want to mention that the partition resolution, I'll probably mention that also in a minute. It was a non-binding recommendation to partition the remaining 22% of the area legally designated for the Jewish homeland. As Professor Sion explained, the British carved off 78% of Palestine and gave it to the Jordanians. And then the UN wanted to carve it up again, but that actually is a violation of the UN Charter. The UN Charter is the basic document that says that you can't do that. You can't carve off the land. This is a copy of the original mandate for Palestine. This area, of course, was Jordan, notice that the Golan Heights was part of the original mandate, and that's something that we've used also in advocacy, and it's something that's coming up again today because the Biden administration is making noises that it may backtrack on Trump's recognition of the Golan Heights, this Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Okay, there were numerous British violations of its mandatory trust obligations. Of course, Transjordan, the carve-outs of 78% of the mandate. The British White Paper of June 3rd, 1922, it limited immigration to economic capacity of to absorb the new Jewish population. Traded away the Golan, this is important, to the French mandate for Syria in the Franco-British agreement on the northern border. And then you had the British White Paper of 1939, which imposed very, very severe immigration limits, and then it was to cut off any Jewish immigration after 5 years. And then there were sort of on the ground violations and anti-Jewish discrimination by the British. Wait, hold on. I do want to mention something else, but the 1939 White Paper actually did one thing that's favorable that can help us in advocacy. There was something called the McMahon letter, or the McMahon correspondence between someone in the British government and the Arabs, McMahon and the Arabs, which made sort of vague promises and about an Arab state or an Arab homeland. The Mann letter actually confirmed that those promises did not apply anywhere to the west of the Jordan River. So when people start talking about the McMahon letter, the British, that promised the land to the Arabs, well, the British, who were not very favorable to the Jews, actually confirmed that that was not true. The British White Paper in 1922 was an attempt to mollify the Arabs after the horrible riots in 1921 that took place, and where many Jews were killed by the Arabs. And it limited the meaning of Al Balfour, and I said it limited immigration to economic capacity, although they had also included some acknowledgement of Jewish rights and the historic connection of the Jewish people. There was some affirmation of that. And the famous line that the Jews are in Palestine as of right and not on sufferance is included in that White Paper. And this is why it is necessary that the existence of a Jewish national home in Palestine should be internationally guaranteed, and it should be formally recognized to rest upon ancient historic connection. Golan Heights, I'm going to speak about that briefly. The head of ZOA, Morton Klein, testified in Congress about this, and this is an example of use of the mandate as an advocacy tool. In 2019, President Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. We're very concerned that Biden might backtrack about that. We testified in Congress, or Morton Klein testified in Congress a few weeks prior to Trump deciding to go ahead and to recognize sovereignty over the Golan. And one of the things that he pointed out was that it was in the original mandate and was traded away by Britain. And he pointed out to this Franco-British agreement, and that this was really not something, a violation of the trust. As for everything, I should mention that these legal rights are only one leg of the many arguments we have. We have truth and justice on our side when advocating. So for instance, when we spoke about the Golan Heights, we also talked about the biblical history there. There's a long Jewish history in the Golan until an earthquake in the mid-800s of the Common Era. 38 ancient synagogues were found there. Also in the 1800s, land was purchased by Jews. There were farmers and Jewish communities, and starting around the 1880s through the early 1900s. And of course, we talk about strategic necessity, and that the Syrians were shooting from the Golan to the farms below in the 19 years before Israel regained the territory in the Six-Day War. The British White Paper of 1939, Britain totally reneged on the Jewish state and immigration trust obligations without any legal authority to do that. And it was really a British attempt to retain control of the area and appease the Arabs. They required Arab consent for more immigration. There were statements in there that we no longer think that it's not part of our policy, that that Palestine should become a Jewish state. This was an absolute disaster. And with that, people went crazy, including in Britain, and many politicians said this is an absolute reneging on their international obligations, that you can't just say that, all of a sudden I'm not going to follow my trust obligations. The immigration restrictions, while Jews were struggling to get away from the Nazis, were horrific. Only if the Arabs are paired, it said that they were only going to permit further expansion of the Jewish national home by immigration, only if Arabs are prepared to acquiesce to it. We should never rely on Arab acquiescence, of course. They only would allow 75,000 immigrants over the next 5 years. They would be subject, and they would still be subject to this idea of economic absorptive capacity. So it could even be less than that. Only 10,000 a year, and then they would try to have 25,000 admitted as soon as they could be satisfied that adequate position was made for their maintenance. And they would, after 5 years, they said no further Jewish immigration will be permitted. This is really just a total violation of their trust obligations. And then under the mandate, and then any Jewish illegal, and listen to this one also, any Jewish illegal immigrants, because Jews were pouring in however they could, through Syria, walking on foot, the illegal boats. And by the way, the Syrians during this period, who were busy also pogroming the Jews, made it a law that anybody who helps the Jewish immigrants who are trying to go through Syria to get to Israel would also be killed. And this was wait, hold on. Oops. Okay, and then they said that they're no longer under any just reneged on their obligation. And this shows some of the massacres. A lot of this was in the British reaction to massacres of Jews. They said no more Jews allowed. There were, from 1936 to 1939, there were numerous massacres of Jews by the Arabs. About 500 Jews were killed. And that's just one of them. And here, this is the confirmation that the McMahon Correspondence is not a just basis for converting Palestine into an Arab state. They said the whole of Palestine west of the Jordan was excluded from Sir Henry McMahon's pledge, and they therefore cannot agree that the McMahon Correspondence forms a just basis for the claim that Palestine should be converted into an Arab state. Okay, here's, I just have a list of responses to claims that the rights given to the Jewish people in the mandate are no longer valid. One is that the UN Charter, of course, from 1945, which has the status of international law, specifically continued the mandate rights after the mandate's expiration. The other one is that the Arab nations, birth certificates, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, etc., their birth certificates are also based on mandates. So of course, Israel's is too. Another one is that UN Resolution 181, which was the partition resolution in 1947, merely recommended partition. A lot of people think that it divided Israel into two states. That's not true. It was merely a recommendation. The Arabs rejected the recommendation and went to war to destroy Israel. Partition never went into legal effect. The resolution did not negate the mandate rights. The resolution 194 that's in 1948 did not create a Palestinian right of return. It dealt with all refugees, Jewish and Arab, and it did not call for any returns until that was practicable. And it made governments, plural, who were responsible for refugee problems, responsible for fixing that. That means that Arab governments who created the problem were responsible. They created the problem by telling the Arabs to leave. The 1949 armistice agreements after the fighting, when Israel was created, it was reestablished in 1948. 7 Arab nations went to war against the Jewish state. At the end of that time, armistice agreements were reached between some of Israel and some of its neighbors, and they specifically said that we're right at the point where the fighting stopped. Those agreements specifically said the armistice lines were, quote, without prejudice to any ultimate political settlement between the parties. And those armistice lines are the famous lines that people call the pre-67 lines or the pre-67 borders. But the agreement itself says those armistice lines are without prejudice, are not real borders. the agreements that created those lines. The lines that are important are the fact that the Jewish people have the rights under the mandate. The Jordanian occupation of Judea and Samaria and Eastern Jerusalem from 1948, after Jordan had invaded, until 1967, when Jordan attacked again and Israel recovered that land. It was illegal. The Jordanian occupation was illegal, was not recognized by the world. Also, UN Resolution 242, which was after the Six-Day War, did not require Israel to withdraw from all territories recaptured in 1967. It entitles Israel to secure and recognize borders, and Israel has already withdrawn from 90% of the areas that it obtained in the defense of 1967 war. The Levi Commission report is very important because it speaks about how, after a careful investigation, how Israel's recapture of Judea and Samaria and Eastern Jerusalem restored the territory to its original status, land designated for the Jewish national home that Jews had the right of possession of during the illegal Jordanian occupation. Also, Jordan relinquished its rights to Judea and Samaria in 1988 and in the Jordan Peace Treaty of 1994. Oslo records deal with Palestinian Administrative Authority. They did not speak of a Palestinian state. The UN Charter and also the UN Charter and mandate rights, including the mandate rights not to cede territory to any foreign entity, made contrary UN resolutions, such as the UN Resolution 2334, which was passed at the end of Obama's term, invalid. So the UN cannot, by resolution, whether it's Security Council or General Assembly, change the mandate rights granted to the Jewish people. Okay, these I've already gone over this. This is just pictures of Jordan's illegal occupation of Eastern Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, and the destruction that they did. They blew up 58 synagogues. It was horrendous. Here's President Johnson, who was the president at the time of the 67 war, and he stated there are some who have urged as a single simple solution an immediate return to the situation as it was on June 4th, 1967. That's just on the eve of the 6-Day War. This is not a prescription for peace, but for renewed hostilities. And here's the quote from Winston Churchill, that the Jews are not in Israel as a sufferance, but as of right, which was included actually in one of the white papers. This is actually the cover sheet for something called a booklet that we give out, and we'd be happy to send to people, called The Myth of Occupation, which goes through a lot of this in a very clear and simplified way, and we give that out on college campuses. Okay, here's some ways that the mandate rights are important to pro-Israel advocacy. First, countering the Arab illegal occupation lie. Israel is not an occupier of land which he is entitled to under binding international law. We frequently point out these laws, this bundle of laws that gives Israel the unquestionable right to Israel, Judea, Samaria, the Golan Heights, etc. It demonstrates that settlements are legal, and settlements were declared legal by the Trump administration. The Biden administration apparently is reviewing that. So this is going to be another big issue that we're going to again talk about the rights, the international rights that the mandate gave, and that the U.S. binding treaty, the 1924 treaty, and the 1945 UN Charter gave to the Jewish people, to the right of close settlement of the land. This is an international legal right, and it's very important for responding to this idea that settlements are not legal. The countering the claim that the international, because the international really is in our favor, what we often see is that the anti-Israel groups say that they just sort of boldly say that the international community recognizes that settlements are illegal or that Israel's presence is illegal. Well, there is no such recognition, and it doesn't matter what anybody in the international community says today, because we have these international rights that were granted to the Jewish people. It supports, this bundle of rights supports Israel's sovereignty over the Golan, Judea and Samaria, and Jerusalem. It counters the lie that Israel violates the Geneva Convention, which you often hear. It supports made in Israel labeling regulations, which have been an issue recently. counters the lie that Israel is required to withdraw to the suicidal 1949 armistice lines, since these are not valid lines with legal effect. It demonstrates that anti-Israel UN resolutions are invalid. It supported the Jerusalem embassy move and recognition. Mort Klein also gave testimony about that, where we spoke in Congress just a few weeks before President Trump made his decision to move the embassy. It demonstrates that there's no entitlement to a Palestinian Arab state or terror state on the land designated for the Jewish homeland. And the mandate rights also reaffirm the historic connection of the Jewish people to Israel. Here, the mandate rights demonstrate, I'm going quickly through a few of these, if time allows. The mandate rights demonstrate that Israeli settlements do not violate the Geneva Convention, of which you often hear, Geneva Convention, the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49. Okay, the Geneva Convention only concerns occupation of another sovereign nation's territory. And of course, Israel has the sovereign rights and is not occupying another sovereign nation's territory. As Yale Law Dean Eugene Rostow said, how could the convention apply to Jews who already had a legal right protected under Article 80 of the United Nations Charter to live in the West Bank, East Jerusalem? Unfortunately, we don't usually call it that, we call it Eastern Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. It was never explained. And the convention only applies to the Geneva Convention only applies to signers and only the armed conflict between two or more high contracting parties. Israel is not a signer; it's not a high contracting party. Also, the Palestinian Authority is obviously not a high contracting party to the Geneva Convention; it's not a signer of it. And also, the convention concerns forcible transfers. Jews voluntarily return to Judea and Samaria and Eastern Jerusalem. This was not a forcible transfer of population. What the Geneva Convention was really enacted after World War II, and what it was concerned with was transfers like of the Nazis of populations, like the Jewish population. They deported the Jews to concentration camps. It has absolutely nothing to do with Jews voluntarily going to live in the parts of the Jewish homeland, but you often hear this. Okay, the mandate's importance for advocating for the recognizing United Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty. Morton Klein's testimony, he stated, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem fulfills U.S. and international law and policy, and then how it will effectuate U.S. law and policy, and then obviously of other nations too. It affects international law. Okay, the mandate's importance for advocating for continuing Made in Israel labeling regulations. The Clinton and Obama administration made regulations saying that Israeli products made over the Green Line have to say made in the West Bank. Clinton didn't really enforce it. Obama tried to enforce it. Trump said that those regulations are no longer effective and that now we can say made in Israel. And now left-wing groups such as J Street and so on, NIF, are trying to reinstate, they asked the Secretary of Homeland Security to reinstate those regulations. ZOA wrote a letter signed by 31 Jewish organizations saying why you can't reimpose, why the Obama era and Clinton regulations, labeling regulations are wrong. And of course, you know, we brought up the international law again, that we said that that this area the Trump regulations are in accordance with binding international law. I mean, this happened over and over again, that these issues come up, and these rights given to the Jewish people are integral to advocating for Israel. And thank you very much.
Hey, Liz, thank you very much. There's so much information that you've presented to us, and some of our listeners have asked how they can get copies of your slides. I don't know if that's possible, but we'll take that up after the webinar is over.